Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. We are pleased to present you this fourth appointment with AlumniLeviLive. And today's webinar is dedicated to the theories of collective creativity applied in particular to the field of record production. And the topic will be addressed by two readers, Paul Thompson from Leeds Beckett University and Alessandro Bratus from University of Pavia. Paul Thompson has worked as a professional recording engineer for over 15 years. He is the program leader for the MA Music Production and teaches on the MA Popular Music and Culture, the BSc Music Technology, Audio Engineering and Music Production programs. He is the author of Creativity in the Recording Studio's Alternative Takes and co-author of Paul McCartney and His Creative Practice, and co-editor of Popular Music in Leeds. His ongoing research interests include music and audio education, popular music history, creativity, and cultural production in popular music. So Professor Thompson will begin the discussion by presenting the theoretical framework relating to the romanticization of creativity, the system model of creativity and its application in the work. So welcome, Paul Thompson, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Okay, I'll just share my screen and hopefully you can all see that. Thank you so much for the invitation from Francesco and the Levy Foundation. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm a reader in popular music at Leeds Beckett University, and my research focuses on popular music education, on history, on heritage, but mostly creativity. I've been researching creativity for 15 years now, and I'm interested in trying to understand what creativity is, where it comes from, and how we can be more creative, if that's possible. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of around 100 years of research into creativity, and then Alessandro is going to introduce his project on creativity and songwriting, just to characterize and contextualize the things that we've covered. So let's begin. Creativity is often presented as something that's inexplicable, something that's mysterious, and this mysteriousness around creativity is connected to the often unchallenged dictionary definition of creativity, that is to bring into being or form out of nothing. And if we take this definition literally, then creativity appears to be something that's impossible for musicians and music makers, because we can't make something out of nothing, although it sometimes seems like it feels like that. And the modern Western notion, or the idea of this term of creativity, has its origins in the Judeo-Christian tradition. This is where the celestial creation of the earth is central to both Jewish and Christian faiths. And these romantic and mythologized ideas of creativity actually influence how songwriters, how artists, how engineers and producers all view their own practices as well. And some of these historic and cultural ideas that are connected to creativity normally place the individual at its center. But more recent research has shown that the individual is only one part of the creative process, and on screen you can see a particular diagram that represents the major levels at which creativity forces operate on a creative individual. And the creative individual is only one part of the process too. There's growing evidence that creativity occurs through the convergence or the confluence or the mixture, the collision of multiple factors within a dynamic system of these types of interactions. And so in line with this research, the definition of creativity has also moved beyond something that's inexplicable or hard to explain to one that helps us to acknowledge these broader interactions and influences. And the influences placed on individuals as they undertake creative work include a variety of interrelated forces as shown on screen. These include an individual's neurological processes, their social environment, their position within a social group, and the group's culture and broader influence of society. So I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so just taking a closer look at some of the research that's been done here and explore some of the historical trends of creativity research. And then we're going to conclude by identifying a more encompassing approach that will help us study the creativity of songwriting that Alessandro will introduce. The first known study of creativity began in 1869 by Sir Francis Galton, and he was interested, his thesis was that you inherit creativity. He called it hereditary genius. And although in later editions of his work he wanted to change the word genius to ability, his introductory statement outlined his central argument that a man's natural abilities are derived by inheritance under exactly the same limitations as are the form and physical features of the whole organic world. And what Francis Galton did is he looked at a number of different categories of historically prominent individuals, such as judges, statesmen, kings, commanders, writers, scientists, poets, painters, musicians, scholars, oarsmen, and wrestlers. And he attempted to show that their inherited ability came from their family lineage. But Galton wasn't able to prove his hypothesis. He found a number of anomalies and irregularities, and as we'd expect, some people didn't follow that lineage. And so, fortunately, creativity research progressed beyond a focus on this basic genetic legacy. In the United States, they took up the idea of focusing on the creative personality. They wanted to explore the creative individual's personality traits and their personality type. Personality traits they defined as the smallest units of individual variation that are consistent, reliable, and valid. And this began at the Institute of Personality Assessment and Research at the University of California in 1949. And particular studies involved the invitation of peer-reviewed selections of creative people from a particular field who were then subjected to a series of tests to determine their personality traits. And after 20 years of research at the Institute, they found that the initial idea of an egghead, long hair, withdrawn introvert, the lone genius, as it were, this type of personality was entirely inaccurate. It's not what they found. Instead, they found that the personality traits that were identified by researchers included things like independence, high energy, willingness to take risks, attraction to complexity, independence of judgment, and flexible decision making. These were all traits of content and productive individuals. And creative personality research continued into the 1970s. A number of different models were created, and most widely used is the 5-factor model. It's sometimes called the OCEAN model, which is derived from the acronym of O, which is openness to experience, C, conscientiousness, E, extroversion, A, agreeableness, and N, neuroticism. And in fact, openness was seen as the most closely connected to creativity, because this is about openness to fantasy, which is a good imagination. It's openness to aesthetics. It's openness to feelings and experiencing and valuing those. It's openness to actions, trying new things and having lots of different interests. It's open to new ideas, being curious and welcoming new challenges, and then being open to different values from unconventional and liberal. Importantly, they found that highly creative people tend to be creative in one specific domain. It takes a lot of experience, knowledge, and training to be able to operate within a particular creative field. And we can't ascribe this attribute to just one biological disposition alone. So creativity research then moved into the realm of cognitive psychology. This built on some of the ideas of creative personality research, and it's been advantageous in gaining some insights into creativity by investigating the mental processes and cognitive capacity that the majority of people all share. According to Keith Sawyer, cognitive psychology research into creativity has been broadly divided into two contending theories. One of this is idealist theory, and the other one is action theory. Idealist theory considers the end product of the creative process to be a creative idea that doesn't have to be shared or implemented or explained. And so there are numerous problems with attempting to study this. And this is why action theory has been more valuable in explaining what actually happens during the creative process. This is where the creative idea has to be realized in order for the creative idea or product to be evaluated, improved, altered, or discarded. And as such, a number of psychological frameworks were developed from the principles of action theory. On screen is Graham Wallace's four-stage model of preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. They found subsequently that there is no experimental evidence for the stage of incubation. And moreover than that, they found that creative individuals don't exhibit showing all of these four stages in one go. And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who we're going to move on to, really says that this four-stage model is a distortion of what actually happens during the creative process. It's less linear than recursive, and then how many iterations it goes through, how many loops of the stages are involved, how many insights are needed depends upon the depth and breadth of those particular issues. Tony Bastick, who was looking at this particular problem in 1982, decided that actually we don't need a four-stage model. We can break it down to two distinct stages of that combines three of the preparation, incubation, and illumination, and then one of verification. And he called this intuition. He describes this as the non-linear parallel processing of global multi-categorized information. What he means is that we are taking in information all of the time, and we're using this to inform our particular ideas. So those first three stages of preparation, incubation, and illumination, he's subsumed into this idea of intuition, and then with the final stage of verification, where we check to see if that creative idea is good. And so instead of seeing creativity as a staged process, Tony Bastick's idea of intuition points towards a more systemic process. And this is where individuals through experience develop specific strategies or ways of thinking, acting, or doing. It also helps to explain why more experienced individuals might get to a particular answer or a problem than maybe a less experienced person. So studies into the psychological and cognitive processes have helped to highlight how knowledge and experience are key to the creative process. Creative processes happen in a cultural context, and so studies into cultural production have helped to further refocus the idea that art making and songwriting in particular is a collective process. And within this collective and collaborative process, there's often a division of labor. Howard Becker, in his book, calls this artwork, where there are socio-cultural boundaries placed around it. This constrains creative individuals, i.e. it sort of constrains and enables their agency in order to make particular choices. And these boundaries include current technology, practices to implement that technology, and then the parameters that the current institution can assimilate, i.e. what's possible essentially within that institution. And so this final point really helps to show why it's problematic to only consider the individual in the creation of artworks. And this is because it ignores the influence of technologies and their accompanying cultural practices, and maybe the additional personnel who contribute to what is often a collective process. And the collective nature of creativity points towards something that is more social and collaborative that has been traditionally or romantically presented. Janet Wolfe, for example, in her book, The Social Production of Art, argues that the creation of artworks has never been separate from the social and political situation of the artist. And the idea of the artist as a sole originator of a work obscures the fact that art has continued to be a collective product. And the work of art, or in Janet Wolfe's terms, cultural product, should be viewed as the complex result of economic and conceptual influences, which have all been mediated through the formal structures of the text, and they owe its existence to a particular practice of the located individual. So taking this one step further, we have research into cultural production, and although French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu wasn't studying creativity as such, he addressed these issues in his writing and his theories of practice. In particular, he looked at the dynamic relationship between the social structure of the field and the creative individual. Bourdieu identifies fields as specialist areas of practice. This includes music, painting, cinematography, and then through experience, individuals operating in these fields develop a strategy, and this is performed within a space of positions, in his own words. And for Bourdieu, creativity, or in his terms, cultural production, takes place at the intersection between habitus and field. He also includes within the field of works, and this includes the accumulation of established cultural work or knowledge and conventional codes and methods of practice. And for our purposes, this includes all of the songs that have been written up until now that have been accepted as good songs, as creative songs. And so the creative agent needs to negotiate these conventional codes. They need to negotiate and consider these methods of practice, and the field of works also, in order to be presented with particular possibilities or creative choices. And so as Bourdieu explains in his words, and this is problematic because it's a translation directly from the French to the English, he says, the heritage accumulated by collective work presents itself to each agent as a space of possibles, that is, an ensemble of probable constraints, which are the condition and the counterpart of a set of possible uses. In other words, and in plainer English, the collective work that he's talking about, the accumulation of that, are all the songs that have been written in a particular area up to this point, and they present ourselves as options for creative agents, as songwriters, in order to be able to write a particular song. And over time, a creative individual working in a particular field develops a field for the game, a practical sense. This is what he calls a habitus. So far, studies in the psychological area or the cognitive area have shown that the underlying cognitive and psychological aspects of creative activity point towards a more systemic process, something else that's happening. And this is where we arrive with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who developed this theory of the systems model of creativity at the Chicago School of Sociology, and almost decentering the individual in the creative process. He says to study creativity by focusing on the individual alone is like trying to understand how an apple tree produces fruit by looking only at the tree and ignoring the sun and the soil that support its life. So in it, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is saying, so actually creativity emerges out of a particular system. This is because there are complex elements and interrelated elements involved in creativity. And here, this is where Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi developed the systems model of creativity. This addresses the issue of non-linearity that we saw in the staged model. And it also acknowledges the integration of dynamic causality. And this is because the systems model demonstrates that creativity is the result of an ongoing dynamic process that contains three distinct parts that aren't necessarily separate. They're only shown as separate to allow us to analyze them. So One of them is a set of symbolic rules of practices and guidelines, and this he calls a domain. We have a person who brings something unique into that domain, and then we have a field, which is a group, a social group of specialists or experts who recognize and substantiate that novelty. And the model displays the ongoing interactions that occur between the domain, the field, and the individual. There's no distinct stages, there's no distinct specific start or end, and this is because the relationships between each of the elements are dynamic links of circular causality. In other words, the principal elements of domain, field, and person both influence and are influenced by each other. And so for creativity to occur, there must be a domain, which contains a set of symbol systems, a body of knowledge, and a culture of practice. An individual needs to acquire a comprehension of that domain, and they need to produce something that has an element of novelty used in that domain. This novelty is then evaluated and validated by the field. And so when we're creating a new song, we need to use the domain of songwriting. We need to then rearrange it in a novel way, and we then present that to the field, and they suggest whether this has some form of creativity. This also points to the importance of tradition within creativity, and this is because creative products and creative ideas are firmly based on what came before. True originality evolves as the individual goes beyond what others have done before. And this idea is in opposition to some of the romantic ideas that surround creativity, that we have the creator's genius and the inherent knowledge that produces their great works. Instead, this particular idea reinforces the view that in order to produce something new, the creative individual needs to become knowledgeable about something that's old. Also, creative individuals need to learn the mechanisms and criteria for selection that operate within the particular field of creativity. They need to know what's expected from particular, in this instance, songs. Songs generally have a particular structure and they have a particular form and an arrangement. And creative individuals and songwriters need to learn what that particular things are. So, creativity occurs at the intersection of these particular interactive elements. And Susan Kerrigan, in her work, takes the creative systems model one tiny step further by making 3 important changes to the model within her work. Susan Kerrigan saw that creativity occurs at the intersection where individuals, domains, and fields interact. But what she didn't see in that original model was creative practices, i.e., how we go about doing things. And so she revised the model in 3 distinct ways. Firstly, she changed the overall model to have a Venn diagram overlay of each of the elements. And what this does is this shows even more closely how connected those elements are of domain, field, and individual. Secondly, she changed the word individual to agent. And what this allows the model to do is to represent creativity in the creative process for not just single individuals, but this can also include partnerships, it can include groups, all the way up to institutions. Anything or anyone with agency who is able to use the domain and then rearrange it in a novel way and present it to the field. And then the final important change that she made is that she places creative practices at the individual, at the emergence and the confluence of each of the elements of the creative system. And the creative systems model is a really useful way to allow us to begin to explore creative practices. So once we contextualize each element of the model and we select a particular moment in time, we can see the creative model in action at a particular point. And Susan Kerrigan's really useful revisions to the systems model support the prevailing concept that systems are wholes that are derived from the interactions between their parts. So what does all of this tell us about creativity? Well, it tells us that new is meaningful only in reference to the old. Original thought doesn't exist in a vacuum. It operates on a set of already existing objects, rules, and representations or notions. It also gives us a formula. So if creativity equals novelty and value, then creativity equals tradition plus innovation. It tells us that tradition isn't diametrically opposed to creativity. It tells us that it's a really important part of it. So I'm now going to hand over to Alessandro, who's going to show how these particular elements actually work in action.
Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you to Fondazione Levi for the organization of this live, and thank you to my colleague Francesco Brusco for having suggested the theme of this meeting, and of course to Professor Thompson for this fascinating overview on creativity and on the complex and interrelated factors that influence the so-called talent in the, we can say, everlasting debate, nature vs nurture. And now I'll pass to Italian and io presento brevemente il professor Bratus, che è professore associato presso il Dipartimento di Musicologia e Beni Culturali dell'Università di Pavia, sede di Cremona. Il professor Bratus insegna materie legate alla popular music nella declinazione analitica, storica e materiale e alla mediazione tecnologica della performance e sulle sue ricadute in termini comunicativi ed estetici ha dedicato il suo ultimo libro Mediatization in Popular Music Recorded Artifacts. A questo filone di ricerca ha affiancato un interesse per la scrittura creativa nella canzone italiana in epoca digitale, a partire dalle attività dell'associazione La Città della Canzone, di cui è tra i fondatori e vicepresidente e di cui appunto ci parla oggi, con un intervento sulla creatività collaborativa nella scrittura delle canzoni e sul laboratorio della Città della Canzone. Prego, professor Bratus.
Grazie, Beatrice, and thank you to Paul for this wonderful introduction of the main themes and this very short summary of 100 years of research into creativity. And I hope to be able to take up from this and to present also a case study on this workshop that I would start in a moment. So, La Città della Canzone is an event we organize every year at the Department of Musicology and Cultural Heritage of the University of Pavia in Cremona. La Città della Canzone literally means the city of song and was originally conceived as an initiative of an informal group of students, young research and teachers, and young researchers and teachers, and it is a collaborative songwriting workshop in which 3 emerging artists between 18 and 35 years old, selected through an open call, spend a whole week, 5 sessions of 4 hours each, working on a song of their own. The aim is to get 1 song per singer-songwriter to at least a pre-production demo stage at the end of the week. Okay. The process is facilitated by established performers and songwriters acting as mentors and is open to students and other participants. The access to the workshop is free and completely public. La Città della Canzone was born out of a desire to do something different from a traditional academic seminar. And we soon realized that it was a valuable opportunity to do fieldwork and gain an immersive perspective on the relational dynamics of the songwriting process. The decision to bring different people with little, if any, connection to each other into the same room with a common task to fulfill helps to establish a collaborative ethos from the start of every workshop. And the fact that we are in a university environment rather than a professional context helps to alleviate some of the tension that would otherwise arise due to the competitive nature of the artistic sector, especially for emerging artists. For the same reasons, it was our intention from the outset that this event will have an educational impact rather than a professional impact, so to say, on both the songwriters and the students. The songwriters could gain a sense of the qualities they need to work on their own strengths and weaknesses in a highly collaborative and complex environment where they are forced to take center stage and present and often defend their own ideas in front of a highly qualified and interested audience. And students observe, document, and participate in a process that mimics and replicates most of the stages of a real-life songwriting experience and do fieldwork. They take part and they learn notes and they observe and collect material about the creative process in a practice-based situation. Most of this work has helped us over the past 10 years to build a comprehensive archive of documentation relating to such events. Audiovisual recordings of most of the sessions, photographs of a wide variety of situation and written musical and lyrical materials, fieldwork notes and students' essay, on-the-spot and retrospective interviews with emerging and experienced songwriters, application to participate as artists in residence at the workshop. All of these sources are of great interest because they document a variety of situations, but also because they can be grouped, cataloged, and compared over a 10-year period. They also preserve a great deal of discussions of trial and error attempts, slightly different version of songs, documenting the journey of the songs from day 1 to day 5 of the workshop and allowing a detailed examination of the musical material and its transformation. So, taking into account the similarities and divergences in the different cases, it may therefore be possible to highlight some common elements that characterize the process of songwriting in this kind of studio-like educational environment, regardless of individual differences related to style, relative experience of individual songwriters, instrumental or vocal skills, or even the talent of the resident or the artist in residence or the resident songwriters. We skip this part and say that as an opportunity to study creativity, La città della canzone is the combination of both theoretical and empirical approaches that provides the basis for a relational understanding of the creative process in this context. The collaborative nature of the section, for example, forces the resident songwriters to share their operational logic through verbal interaction with groups of people. And such an exercise allows the group to adapt its collective, collaborative contribution on the spot to the needs of each artistic project. And the songwriters are forced to reflect on their ability to clearly express their own objective and to admit their limitation in order to seek help from others. Furthermore, and I will come back to this point at the end of this presentation, another key factor in the organization of the residential workshop is the alternation between individual moments of reflection and writing, the assignment of specific tasks within smaller peer groups, plenary group discussion of the main results of each session, and supervised activities from an artistic, with the mentors, and a technical in the recording studio point of view. Access to such a wide range of activities clarifies who the actors are and what their roles in each moment of this process of realizing a phonographic project are. And it also opens up perspectives to consider how each actor promotes different ways of intervening in the musical material, and how these transformations reflect the hierarchical and the trusting relationship between the people in the room at each stage of the process. A case study I can only brief outline here to demonstrate some methodological and empirical findings concern Serie A song by the young Italian songwriter Fusaro, one of the artists in residence during the 2019 edition of the workshop. By highlighting the main areas on which the collaborative efforts were focused in this example, we can also identify the focal points around which the creative process evolved and reflect on how the elaboration of these elements took place. Not only was I able to gather material during the workshop on this song, but thanks to Fusaro's generous contribution, I also had access to the preliminary sketches of the song, some recordings he made with his mobile phone to memorize just the first version of the verse-chorus unit of the song. And then I was able also to reconstruct the later stages of elaboration when, after the workshop, the song found its way into the world and was released in a different version with some new elements on Fusaro's first album, Di quel che c'è non manca niente, and literally this means there is nothing missing from what we have. As we can see from the slide, this is summarizing in the column the song structure, and with different styles of the writing, also the phases of the elaboration of the song. As we can see from this slide, the collaborative efforts made during the workshop focused, which are showed here in italics, focused on three elements. The elaboration of a third session that comes after the chorus, therefore referred to here as the post-chorus. The insertion of what I called an instrumental tattoo or motto after this post-chorus, and which is a short melody played by a trumpet, invented by Fusaro on his very first night in Cremona, and the writing of a second verse in the lyrics. All these actions helped the singer-songwriter to make progress in the completion of a song that he admittedly had become stale, and it was something completely different from the other song he had written until then. The workshop was also the first opportunity for him to invest in some dedicated time on his own songwriting, in a context where the focus also of a collective shared interest by a group of people. And this ultimately proved to be an empowering moment in his career, as he contemplated making music for a living, as he does now. And now he's working primarily as an author, but also continue with his own solo project. By collecting and studying the sources documenting the writing and production of Serie A as a phonographic track, I was able to compare the effects of vertical and horizontal relational dynamics at play in the different stages of the song's development. These interactions and the possibility of framing them with patterns of behavior linked the modification of the compositional material in terms of lyrics, harmony, song structure, and the like, and define the creative process we observe here as the application of a recursive problem-solving technique whose main objective is to express a given content in a way that respects and realizes the expressive objectives initially sketched by its originating author. Such work on the effectiveness and definition of all the parameters of the song was started by Fusaro and then continued during La Città della Canzone workshop and was later perfected by other fellow musicians, record producers, and more experienced colleagues. As we can see from this slide, different aspects of the creative process and different roles were played by different people as the song developed. In the first phase of the song's history, three main elements were added: the trumpet motto that concludes the second verse of the song and that accompanies the outro with its characteristic offbeat attack, a post-chorus section that precedes such motto, and the completion of the second verse, as I said before. The first of these elements, the trumpet riff, the trumpet motive, holds much of the unplanned presence of Stefano Costantini in the 2019 workshop, a friend and a band member of that year workshop first mentor, Marco Guazzone, and a professional trumpeter who was able to provide the sound and timbre Fusaro had in mind for this melodic element. Second, in terms of structure and lyrics, Marco Guazzone and a group of students were the key players who, in close collaboration with Fusaro, helped him to find a first suitable compositional solution to complete the song as a whole. And third, the recording and production of Serie A demo was then completed during the last 2 days of the workshop, with the technical assistance of Nicola Carenzi, our recordist and sound engineer, and the artistic direction, and under the artistic direction of Alberto Bianco, another more experienced songwriter and the second mentor of the 2019 edition of the songwriting workshop. But this was not the end of the story, as the song underwent further important changes after the workshop and before it was included in the Fusaro first album. Duopo Trio, Fusaro's backing band at the time, both in live and in the studio, and producer Alessandro Bavo significantly reworked both the post-chorus and helped to modify the lyrics of this section as they were first composed in Cremona. And then, when Alberto Bianco received the track on which he was to overdub some vocal part, he decided to intervene and by extracting a loop from the final part of the post-chorus, added an almost spoken bridge before the final chorus. This changing, together with the overall choices made in terms of soundbox and arrangement, took the song even further away from the original acoustic verse-chorus ballad we had in Cremona and significantly altered the formal balance of the song as a whole. Now to jump to my final part and to my conclusion. The observation of this transformation and their contribution in the Serie A creative process bring us back to our original, to my original research question. So can we distinguish between different typologies of musical transformation of the compositional materials of a song? And more importantly, can we relate such transformation to the different relational situations that occur during the elaboration of the song, in the dynamics between individual and collective creative work within peer and supervised groups of contributors? My observation of the creative project of this song, together with the immersive experience I had the chance to gain within the previous and recent edition of the workshop, led me to propose the identification of three different types of transformation in the musical material, namely the original creation itself, the elaboration, and the selection, which can be, I think, related to three main typologies of working situation: the individual work, the work within a peer group, and the supervised work. Of course, there's no strict bionivocal correspondence between the two axes, and nor is there a linear path to navigate this space. However, my impression is that the global shape of this diagram attempt to highlight which relational conditions are more likely to occur for a particular typology of transformation, placing at the two extremes individual creation on the one hand and individual writing on the one hand, and the selection of pre-composed elements by professional figures with a higher degree of authority in a given production process on the other hand. So the conclusion of my presentation remains open, and I would like to contribute to the previous discussion also, and I would like to hear also what Paul thinks about this possible frame of different action and a different situation. Because I want to emphasize only the attempt I made to situate the study of songwriting and popular music composition on the one hand within the tradition of close reading of artistic artifact, and on the other hand I will also think that I also say that this kind of work and the opportunity to document, observe, and immerse ourselves in this kind of studio-like environment stresses, on the one hand, the relevance of the relationship, but also the possibility to relate this relationship with the transformation of the materials, of the compositional materials of song. So I think this is my presentation, and we can now open the floor to discussion.
Thanks, Alessandro. So it just occurred to me, so I've just been flicking through my files as to what's happening in your final slide, where you're working from a demo and then it becomes collaborative, and then so there's the individual collaborative sort of group element towards that. And this made me think of one of the illustrations that I developed for my book is, and this is how we can apply the systems approach to it, is that we have three ways that we can view the creative process at different levels. So we can see the scalability. So the properties of systems are that they are complex, they are non-linear, they have emergence within them, so things emerge from them rather than having a direct cause and effect relationship. They are interconnected, they're complementary, but this particular thing on screen shows how they are also scalable. And I think your particular example shows that too. So we can see the systems model and how it applies to the individual. They've internalized, the person writing the song has internalized the domain of songwriting. They have rearranged it in a novel way, or they've taken the tradition and added some form of innovation, whether that's lyrically, harmonically, structurally. thematically. And then they've also internalized the selection criteria of the field. What will other songwriters think of this song? In all of my experience of listening to songs, what have I heard thus far? And so what can I use within, in Pierre Bourdieu's terms, the field of works? What can I use from the field of works that will give me particular options in order to explore within the creation of this song? But we can also see, once that particular idea or the demo song is then released to the group and we begin to work with somebody else, we can see then that it creates a sort of microsystem of creativity. Keith Sawyer talked about this in his book Group Creativity when he was looking at improvising jazz musicians. And this is the idea that he calls it a micro domain, because we're not using the broader domain, we're not using all of the symbol systems, all of the elements of the cultural matrix of songwriting. We're using a smaller form of it. So he calls this a micro domain. And then the people working on it, i.e. the agents, so that might be a pair of songwriters, it might be the pair of songwriters plus the record producer once we get to the recording studio. They form a micro field of creativity. They assess, they reject, they include or adjust particular ideas as you're working on that particular song. And then when you come to record the song in a similar way, ideas are assessed, they are accepted or rejected based on what the microfield think. This also points to the fact that a field isn't a flat hierarchical system. People within fields have different types of Pierre Bourdieu calls it different types of capital, and there's 4 types of capital: cultural, symbolic, social, and economic. And more usually it's the person with economic capital who wins out because they're paying for it. But in your particular example, it might be someone who's got more cultural capital, i.e. more knowledge, or it might be they have some symbolic capital. They might be someone who's famous within that particular field. So their suggestions might be more accepted than other people's, maybe a student's suggestion as well. And then we can see that once the song is released, we can see how the systems model relates to whatever that is. But you can almost draw a skewer, because these things are happening all at the same time. They are concurrent, essentially, and they're interdependent, and they are complementary. And this is where the song, or the finished record of the song, emerges at the intercept of each one of those. So hopefully that connects what you were talking about, Alessandro, to the particular area here.
Yeah, I think it does perfectly. And this idea of the scalability of the system is precisely what we see each year, and in each situation you can apply this particular frame to address and to describe the micro situation. And this is why I talked about the different activities that took place within the workshop: the peer group, the peer work on some particular problems, the global discussion, and the work in the recording studio. Each involved different groups of people, and each of them can probably be related to some scale and in some extent to this particular to this relationship between domain, field, and individual, or agent, better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, since we have some minutes, if there are no questions from the viewers, I would ask one myself, addressed to both of you. In both of your lectures, I think technology kind of played the role of the stone guest. And how does it fit into this system model of creativity? Can we think of it as belonging to the domain, to the field, or the agent? Or maybe is there a percentage of technology in any of them?
That's a really good question, and it points towards everything that's on screen here, because technology is just as much about part of the domain, because it's part of the symbol system and the cultural matrix. But the way in which we use that technology is just as much part of the field and also the agent. And it's important to remember that the agent isn't separated from the field. The field isn't something that happens outside of the creative process. We ourselves are members of the field who are able to affect the structure of the domain. And so technology is a really interesting one, because various people have developed particular models and theories about how to bring technology into the creative process. Bruno Latour and scholars like that were looking at giving agency to machines. So they come up with this idea of actor network theory. So connecting the different actors to each other in order to show how they are contributing to the creative process. And part of the problem with using actor network theory to explain the creative process is that actor network theory doesn't consider the context. And as we've seen from our whistle-stop tour of 120 odd years of research into creativity, context is key. Context informs and is informed by the creative agents that are working inside a particular cultural field and using a particular cultural domain. So in answer to your question, it probably depends upon the way in which you're looking at technology. If you're looking at it solely as a thing, we could probably consider it part of the domain. But we also need to be considerate, because that would be a technological determinist point of view, that a piece of technology then is the reason why creativity happens. We know that we need people to enact creativity. And I think some of the really interesting research that comes out of your question, Francesco, is probably going to be in AI and music, artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is a tool that's designed by agents. It's given all of this domain, symbol system and cultural matrix, but it doesn't quite have the contextual information always to make a particular informed view. And this is where the field is important, because the field judges that particular novelty and creativity. So that's a really short answer to the question that probably needs another book, potentially.
I'm waiting for the book.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I would like to add only a short addition to this point of technology. Going back to the creative process, one of the aspects that fascinates me is the style that each individual uses technology to sketch ideas, to try out some solution, to combine ideas and to memorize these experiments and to share the experiment with others. And so is especially with digital technology, I think it has become crucial both in shaping the form and uses and the materials of compositional material, but also the collaborative opportunities we have to connect with others. I don't think that writing a song with either 7, 8, or 10 people could be so easy as it is now, without the use of some common technological interface or some interface that allow us to share our work in real time with others. So it is also another aspect of the technology we can probably consider in this discussion.
Okay, and thank you for your answer. There is a question from the chat. Buonasera, thanks for the presentations. Would it be possible to hear a few moments of the different versions of Husserl's songs, just to hear some of these transformations for Professor Bratus?
Yes, sure. I have prepared a short version of the song summarizing some of the main transformations. So I can now share. Okay. Paul, probably I should ask you to stop the sharing of your screen. Okay, so I can share my sound, and I let you hear just this editing of the song at the very in the very first 30 seconds. You can hear the very first version of the song, the pre-workshop version, and then a short clip from the workshop version, and then the phonographic track. So I have it here.
C'è un presidio di lavoratori di fronte a una fabbrica. Una figlia, un fratello, un nipote, una mamma e un papà. Una di tanti bandiere che paiono una. E una di cori che più non ne ha. Un terzo dei soldi che spendo ogni giorno per acqua ed elettricità. Potrei finanziare una squadra di calcio emergente che arrivi poi in Serie A, in Serie A, in Serie A, che arrivi poi in Serie A, in Serie A, in Serie A, che arrivi poi in Serie A, ma ci sarà una via d'uscita per evitare la salita, un sentiero nascosto da un bivio poco più in là. Pila infinita di appunti sulla scrivania e quando serve passa il vento a sventolare. Con un terzo dei soldi che spendo ogni giorno per tasse d'università potrei diventare una stella del calcio emergente che arrivi poi in Serie A, in Serie A, in Serie A, che arrivi poi in Serie A, in Serie A, in Serie A, che arrivi poi in Serie A, ma ci sarà una via d'uscita per evitare la salita. Cerco un punto che mi salverà, ma ci sarà una via di fuga per evitare la caduta. Resta chi non retrocederà, chi non retrocederà. Con una fila di punti sul braccio ed ogni cosa che faccio mi riporta di là. E forse la Serie A non era poi quello che sognavamo quando giocavamo in strada io e te, perché nei sogni all'inizio non c'è quasi mai spazio di immaginare un percorso che preveda un percorso per saltare un percorso che arrivi poi in Serie A. Ci sarà una via d'uscita.
Just fade out before the conclusion of the song, right? It just to give you the sense of where the main transformation happened, and also how the main transformation in terms of sound, in terms of soundbox of arrangement, occurred to the song in the three different phases of its elaboration.
Alessandro, also sounded to me that there was a difference in rhythm.
Yeah.
So the rhythm changed. Did the overall beats per minute change as well?
Yes.
Was it made quicker? Okay.
Yeah, especially in the post-chorus section, they reworked during the studio work because they find it more interesting, and also changed the lyrics to make the lyrics less, say, less hermetic and more clear to understand in making this point of and in clarify this metaphor of the Serie A, of the Premier League series, with a short with the need for some people to trust that there are shorter ways to make a living or something like that.
Yeah. Fantastic. No more questions?
No, I think that will be a suitable ending. And they say from the chat, beautiful and very clear, thank you, and spectacular job.
Yeah, I agree.
Grazie.
So Beatrice, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you so much also for the last song. And I was curious to know if this approach of collaborative writing was used even later in the production of these songwriters. Did it become a method of working?
I should say no, and is normal production, but as the collaboration is nowadays the way in which songwriters make a living, I think he benefits from this experience of trying to have this first collaborative experiment in our workshop. So the educational relevance of this experience, I think it's more rewarding here for us and for the songwriters that participate in the workshop.
Yeah, it has a really great value. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
Okay,
And
so
I think we can thank you, thank all the participants and end the live.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Professor Thompson, Professor Bratus, Francesco Brusco, Fondazione Levi, and all the people that are working behind this meeting possible. Thank you so much.
yeah, sorry, Beatrice, just to remind the next appointment, which is on Friday, 24th May, and it's Gestione, tutela e valorizzazione dei beni musicali della Fondazione Palazzo Coronini Kronberg di Gorizia, with dottoressa Cristina Bragaglia, Angela Romagnoli e Alessia Zangrando.
Great. Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.